The morning of July 15th, 2157 started like any other Tuesday. Coffee brewing in kitchens across America. Kids getting ready for summer camp. Stock markets opening in Asia. Nobody expected it to be humanity's last day of innocence. At exactly 11:47 a.m. Eastern, the sky went dark. Not the gentle darkness of an eclipse, but the absolute blackness of something massive blocking out the sun itself. Warning sirens began their haunting wail across every continent as humanity looked up to see their worst nightmare made real. The alien fleet materialized above, Earth like death itself, colossal ships stretching across the horizon, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly metal that seemed to absorb light. Each vessel was the size of Manhattan, bristling with weapons that pulsed with ominous energy. The shadow they cast plunged half the planet into an artificial twilight that chilled the soul. Admiral Vexara of the Vorthan Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Worldbreaker, his 6 eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction as he gazed. Down at the primitive blue marble below, his scaled hands gripped the command console as he sneered at what he saw. Backward world with crude satellites and laughably simple technology. Intelligence confirms they barely achieved space travel. 50 years ago, he hissed to his assembled officers, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had conquered 38 worlds. Their weapons are chemically propelled projectiles. Their defenses are electromagnetic barriers. This extermination will take mere hours. A creature with tentacles for arms manipulated the holographic display showing Earth's major population centers. Sir, our scans indicate approximately 8 billion life forms concentrated in urban areas. Should we target military installations first? His laugh was like grinding metal. Why waste time? These primitives have nothing that could threaten us. Target their cities. Let them watch their civilization burn before we finish the job. But here's what the Vorthons didn't know. And this is where their arrogance became their downfall. They had been studying humanity for exactly 63 years, for months and 12 days. They had cataloged human art, music, literature, and culture. They had observed our tendency toward cooperation, our love of peace, our desire to explore. Rather than conquer, they had completely missed the other half of human nature. At 0800 GMT, the bombardment began. Plasma beams, each one carrying the energy of a small star, carved through Earth's atmosphere like burning swords from heaven. The first target was New York City. In 2.3 seconds, the greatest metropolis in human history vanished in nuclear fire, leaving only a crater of molten glass where millions had lived and loved just moments before. London was next. The ancient city that had survived the Blitz, that had weathered countless storms of history, became nothing more than a smoking wound in the earth. The Thames boiled away instantly, leaving only superheated steam rising from the devastation. Tokyo's skyline, that magnificent testament to human engineering and dreams, melted into glass. The cherry blossoms that had bloomed for 1,000 springs would never bloom again. In minutes, 3 of humanity's greatest achievements were reduced to radioactive scars on the planet's surface. But you know what? Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to a predator is attacking something that's been pretending to be prey. Deep beneath NORAD, in a bunker that had been quietly reinforced with materials that didn't officially exist, Colonel Jack Harrison watched the carnage unfold. On screens that showed his world dying in real time, his weathered hands gripped the edge of the command console, knuckles white with a rage that went beyond human comprehension. Harrison wasn't just watching cities burn. He was watching his life disintegrate. His wife Emma had been in Chicago for a medical conference when the second wave hit. The woman who had held his hand through 23 years of marriage, who had made him coffee every morning for over 2 decades, was gone, vaporized, erased from existence as if she had never mattered. His daughter Katie, his brilliant, beautiful Katie, who was going to be a doctor just like her mother, had been at summer camp in Denver when the third wave struck. The girl who had called him daddy until she was 16, who still sent him terrible jokes via text message, was nothing but atoms scattered in the wind. "Sir," whispered Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez, his voice shaking as he stared at the incoming data streams. Rodriguez was 26 years old and had joined the service because he believed in protecting people. Now he was watching those same people die by the millions. The deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the solar system. Whatever they hit us with, it's activating the real defenses. Harrison's jaw tightened. The Vorthons had made a fatal error in their intelligence gathering. They had studied humanity during peacetime, cataloging our art, our music, our literature, our tendency toward cooperation and peace. They had observed us building parks instead of bunkers, schools instead of weapon factories, hospitals instead of military installations. They had completely missed the other half of human nature, the half that had survived ice ages and predators, the half that had built weapons capable of cracking stars, the half that had been quietly preparing for this exact moment for over half a century, you see. Humanity had a little secret. We'd been watching the Vorthons right back. Every world they destroyed, every species they exterminated, every act of cosmic genocide they committed had been carefully documented, analyzed, and planned for. We knew they were coming. We'd always known they were coming. Then let's show these bastards what happens when you murder our families, Harrison growled, his voice carrying the weight of a species that had just been pushed beyond its breaking point. Activate Protocol Omega. All of it. Sleeping Dragon was about to wake up, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had survived every extinction event in Earth's history. They were about to discover that the greatest predators in the universe weren't the ones with the biggest guns. They were the ones smart enough to let their enemies think they were helpless. Ready to see what happens when humanity stops playing. Nice. The next part of this story will show you exactly why you should never underestimate a species that's been preparing for war since before your civilization existed. And if you want to understand how small advantages can compound into overwhelming power over time, check out my video about the power of compounding, because that's exactly what humanity is about to demonstrate on a galactic scale. Celebration lasted exactly 47 minutes and 32 seconds. Admiral Vexara had just finished dictating his victory message to the Vorthon High Command when the universe decided to teach him a lesson about premature celebrations. It started with a tremor in the ocean floors. Not just Earth's oceans. Every body of water on the planet began to churn and bubble as if something massive was stirring beneath the surface. The first structure to emerge was in the Pacific, rising from the Mariana Trench like a mechanical leviathan awakening from the deepest sleep. "Sir," stammered Communications Officer Jack Snill, his voice cracking with disbelief, "we're detecting massive energy signatures. Something is ... rising from their oceans." Vexara turned from his victory feast, expecting to see the death throes of a dying world. Instead, his 6 eyes widened in horror as he watched a structure the size of a mountain emerge from the depths. It wasn't a building. It was a fortress, bristling with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. But that was just the beginning. Across the solar system, asteroids that had drifted lazily through space for decades suddenly began to unfold like metallic flowers. What the Vorthons had cataloged as harmless space rocks revealed themselves to be massive battle stations. There, surfaces splitting open to reveal weapon arrays that could shatter moons. "This cannot be," gasped Science Officer Velenix, her tentacles writhing in terror as she stared at the tactical display. "Our intelligence showed a primitive species. They barely had chemical rockets. But here's the thing about human intelligence: we're really, really good at lying. For 60 years, humanity had been playing the greatest game of hide-and-seek in galactic history. Every probe the Vorthons sent, every surveillance satellite they deployed, every spy they infiltrated into human space, all of it had been carefully managed to show exactly what we wanted them to see." Admiral Vexara stared at the tactical display in growing horror as the true scope of humanity's deception became clear. The readings were impossible. Dreadnoughts the size of cities were materializing throughout the solar system, their hulls bristling with weapons that seemed to warp reality itself. Energy signatures that defied every law of physics he knew were lighting up his screens like a nightmare Christmas tree. The humans hadn't just hidden their military, they'd hidden an entire war machine that made the Warthen fleet look like children's toys. "How?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos erupting on his bridge. How did they advance so quickly? His intelligence chief, a creature whose entire career had been built on understanding alien species, could only stare at the data in stunned silence. "Sir, I don't think they advanced. I think they were always this powerful. They were just hiding it." The first ship to decloak was directly above the Vorthen flagship. The UES Vengeance materialized like death, itself a 2-kilometer nightmare that had masqueraded as space debris for decades. Its hull was black as the void between stars, covered in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its captain was Rebecca Stone, a woman who had been baking cookies for her twin son's school fundraiser when the Atlanta strike vaporized half of Georgia. Marcus and Daniel Stone, aged 8 and 10, had been playing soccer in their backyard when the plasma beam turned them into atomic particles. She had felt their deaths through the quantum communication link that connected every human to the defense network. Her voice cut through space like a blade, transmitted on every frequency the Vorthans used. "This is Captain Stone of the United Earth Defense Force. You wanted to see what humanity's capable of? You're about to get a very personal demonstration." The Vorthans fired desperately, their plasma cannons unleashing everything they had. Beams that could melt mountains, energy blasts that could boil oceans, weapons that had destroyed 38 civilizations. All of it struck the Vengeance's shields and simply stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed, stopped. The energy hung in space for a moment, suspended in some kind of field that shouldn't have existed according to known physics. Then, impossibly, it began to flow backward, redirected, and fed directly into the ship's power. "Core! Impossible!" breathed Thexera, his voice hollow with dawning terror. "They're using our own weapons against us." Stone's laugh was colder than the vacuum of space. "You really thought we'd been sitting idle for 60 years? We learned from the 38 worlds you butchered before us. We studied every battle, analyzed every weapon, reverse-engineered every piece of technology you thought was superior. But here's what made it truly terrifying. The humans hadn't just copied Vorthen technology, they had improved it. A shield system that was currently turning the Vorthon fleet's own weapons against them was based on principles that the Vorthons had discovered but never fully understood. We've been preparing for you for 60 years, Stone continued, her voice carrying the weight of a species that had just watched billions of their own die. Did you really think we'd let you catch us defenseless? The Vengeance's main cannon began to charge. The weapon wasn't just big, it was impossible. The energy readings suggested it was drawing power from sources that existed outside normal space-time. The very fabric of reality began to warp around the ship's bow as the weapon reached full charge. Firestone said quietly, the blast that erupted from the Vengeance didn't just destroy the lead Vorthen cruiser, it erased it from existence. The beam tore through space-time itself, creating a rift that consumed the enemy's ship and then sealed itself, leaving nothing behind but empty space and confused sensor readings. The ship hadn't exploded. It hadn't been vaporized. It had simply ceased to exist as if it had never been built in the first place. Target the next ship, Stone ordered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just happened. And broadcast this on all frequencies. You killed our children. You burned our cities. You thought you were dealing with primitives. The Vengeance's weapons began to charge again, and across the solar system, hundreds of other human ships began to emerge from their hiding places. Each one was a testament to 60 years of secret preparation. 60 years of humanity's greatest minds working in the shadows to prepare for this exact moment. You were wrong, Stone's voice echoed across the void, reaching every Vorthen ship in the system. We are not primitives. We are your worst nightmare. We are what happens when you give a species with nothing left to lose the time and motivation to prepare for war. The awakening was complete. Humanity had stopped pretending to be helpless. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth's children had survived every extinction event in their planet's history. They were about to discover that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest claws. It's the one that's been quietly sharpening its teeth while you weren't looking. Want to see what happens when humanity stops playing defense and goes on the offensive? The next part of this story will show you exactly why preparation and patience can overcome any advantage. And if you want to understand how small, consistent efforts can compound into overwhelming power over time, check out my video about the power of compounding, because that's exactly what humanity had been doing for 60 years, within 8 hours. The Vorthan invasion fleet was nothing but scattered atoms drifting through the void. 8 hours. How long it took humanity to completely annihilate a force that had conquered 38 worlds over 3 centuries. But here's the thing about humans. We don't just win battles. We make sure our enemies never forget why they lost. Admiral Tom Bradley stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the flagship of humanity's counterattack force, watching the tactical displays with the cold satisfaction of a man who had just watched his species bullies get their comeuppance. At 62 years old, Bradley had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. And now that it was here, he felt nothing but ice-cold determination around him. Holographic displays showed the known galaxy in stunning detail. 38. Red dots marked the worlds the Vorthans had destroyed, entire civilizations reduced to radioactive ash. Billions of lives snuffed out because the Vorthans believed might made right. Each dot represented a species that had trusted the universe to be fair, that had believed civilization meant something. They had been wrong. But humanity had been taking notes. They thought they were dealing with cavemen, Bradley said. To his assembled fleet commanders, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had just revealed its true nature, they were wrong. We've been watching them for decades, learning their roots, their habits, their weaknesses. Every world. They destroyed every species they exterminated, every act of cosmic genocide they committed. We cataloged it all. The fleet commanders around him were a mix of ages and backgrounds, but they all shared the same look in their eyes. The look of people who had lost everything and found something harder than grief on the other side. Captain Jennifer Walsh had lost her parents in the Chicago strike. Commander David Price had watched his hometown of Portland become a crater. Major Sarah Kim had seen her entire extended family vaporized in the Seoul bombardment. Now we collect on their debt, Bradley continued, his smile sharp as a blade, with interest. The human fleet that emerged from hiding was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. We're talking about ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that could age targets to dust in seconds, and most terrifying of all, humans who had studied warfare for their entire evolutionary history. You know what makes humans unique in the galaxy? Every other species had evolved from herbivores or filter feeders. They had developed technology and then learned to fight. Humans were different. We were apex predators who had learned to think. We had been perfecting the art of war since before. We discovered fired Captain Lisa Carter of the UES Wrath was the first to demonstrate what 60 years of preparation could accomplish. Her ship intercepted a Vorthan supply convoy 3 systems away from the main battle. Appearing out of nowhere like a ghost ship materializing from the void, the convoy consisted of 12 massive freighters, carrying supplies to Vorthan forward. Bases escorted by 6 heavy cruisers that had never lost a battle. They detected the human ship on their sensors and immediately went to battle stations, confident that their superior numbers and proven technology would make short work of a single enemy vessel. They were about to learn the difference between superior technology and superior thinking. Carter's ship didn't attack conventionally. Instead, it activated weapons that shouldn't have existed according to known physics. Temporal destabilizers that could age matter at the molecular level, turning the strongest hull plating into dust in seconds. The aliens barely had time to scream before their ships simply ... aged to death. Message to all Vorthan forces, Carter. Broadcast across all frequencies, her voice carrying the weight of a species pushed beyond its breaking point. You killed our children. You burned our cities. You thought we were weak because we chose peace over conquest. Her laugh was cold as space itself. It's the sound of someone who had watched her world burn and decided that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. You were wrong. We are coming for you.
All of you.
But here's where it gets really interesting and really terrifying. The human fleet didn't just attack randomly. They had been studying Vorthon military doctrine for decades, learning their supply routes, their communication protocols, their command structure. Every move was calculated. Every strike was surgical. The Vorthon High Command, safe in their fortress world of Kethmer, began receiving fragmentary reports from across their territory. Human ships appearing from nowhere, their technology impossibly advanced, their tactics ruthlessly efficient. Entire fleets vanishing without a trace, leaving only debris fields and unanswered distress calls. Demanded Supreme Commander Velkoth, his voice rising to a shriek as he stared at the tactical displays showing red zones spreading across Vorthon space like a plague. How did they advance so quickly? Our intelligence showed a primitive species. Intelligence Chief, a creature whose entire career had been built on understanding alien civilizations, could only stare at the incoming reports in stunned silence. Ship after ship, fleet after fleet, base after base, all of it disappearing into the void, as if humanity had summoned an army of ghosts. "Sir," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't think they advanced. I think they were always this powerful. They were just ... hiding." The implications hit the room like a physical blow. The humans hadn't suddenly developed advanced technology. They had possessed it all along, carefully concealed behind a facade of primitive space, exploration, and peaceful intentions. For 60 years, they had been watching, learning, pairing, and now they were hunting. Captain Mike Rodriguez of the UES Nemesis struck a mining colony on the outer rim. The attack lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, and it was over. The colony's military installations had been reduced to atomic dust, but every civilian building remained untouched. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy military targets with surgical precision. But they weren't monsters. They were something far more terrifying. They were methodical. Commander Ashley Brooks of the UES Judgment intercepted a Vorthon battle fleet heading to reinforce their home system. The enemy fleet consisted of 47 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts that had never been defeated in combat. The human ship was alone. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, the Vorthon fleet was gone, and the UES Judgment continued on its patrol route as if nothing had happened. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity hadn't just survived the Vorthon attack. They had used it as an excuse to reveal their true nature. And that nature was absolutely terrifying. Want to see what happens when humanity stops hunting and starts conquering? The next part of this story will show you exactly why preparation and patience always triumph over brute force. And if you want to understand how small, consistent efforts can compound into overwhelming advantage over time, check out my video about the power of compounding, because that's exactly what humanity had been doing for 60 years. And the results were about to reshape the galaxy forever. The Vorthon homeworld of Vexmore had never known fear. For over 1,000 years, it had stood as the impregnable heart of an empire that had crushed civilizations across the galaxy. Protected by orbital defense platforms that could shatter moons and surrounded by their most powerful fleets, it was considered the most fortified world in known space. That reputation lasted exactly until 1432 Galactic Standard Time, on the day humanity arrived. The UES Apocalypse emerged from hyperspace like Judgment incarnate, its massive bulk blotting out the stars themselves. The ship was monstrous, a mobile fortress that defied every law of physics the Vorthons understood. At 12 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that seemed to bend reality around them, it was the culmination of humanity's greatest secret project. For 40 years, the hidden shipyards of Europa had labored in absolute secrecy building this vessel in the shadow of Jupiter, where no alien probe would ever think to look. Every component had been forged by human hands. Every system designed by human minds that had spent decades studying their enemies' weaknesses. Its captain was James Mitchell, a man whose entire life had been shaped by a single moment of unimaginable loss. He had been 17 years old, playing basketball in his high school gym in Portland. When the Vorthan plasma beam vaporized his hometown, in 0.7 seconds, everything he had ever known, his family, his friends, his girlfriend Sarah, who was supposed to meet him for dinner that night, all of it became atomic vapor. Now, at 57, Mitchell commanded enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The irony wasn't lost on him. This is Admiral Mitchell of the United Earth Defense Force. His voice boomed across all frequencies, reaching every Vorthan on the planet's surface and every ship in the surrounding fleet. His words carried the weight of a species that had spent 60 years preparing for this exact moment. You destroyed our world. You killed our people. You thought you were dealing with primitives. The apocalypse's main cannon began to charge, its energy signature so intense it was visible from the planet's surface as a growing star of malevolent light. The weapon drew power from sources that existed outside normal space-time, tapping into the quantum foam that underlied reality itself. Time to learn what primitives are really capable of, Mitchell continued. His voice as cold as the void between stars. The Vorthan defense fleet didn't hesitate. They threw everything they had at the human ship plasma cannons that could boil oceans, quantum torpedoes that could punch through neutron star material, even their forbidden dark matter weapons that had been banned by Galactic Convention. The barrage was incredible. Enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds struck the apocalypse simultaneously, creating an explosion that lit up the entire star system. For a moment, the Vorthons dared to hope they had destroyed the impossible human vessel. Then the smoke cleared, and the apocalypse was still there, completely undamaged, not just undamaged, stronger. The ship's shields had absorbed every joule of energy from the attack. Its hull had shrugged off impacts that should have vaporized mountains, and its power core was now running at 150% capacity, thanks to the energy it had just consumed. "What are they?" whispered Supreme Commander Velkoth from his command bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, watching his most powerful weapons fail utterly against a single enemy ship. His voice cracked with the terror of a predator who had just realized he was facing something far higher on the food chain. Mitchell's response was broadcast planet-wide, reaching every Vorthan citizen, every military installation, every government official who had ever supported their species. Campaign of cosmic genocide. We're what you get when you attack a species that's been preparing for war since before your civilization existed. We're the nightmare you never saw coming, but here's what made it truly terrifying. Humanity could have destroyed Dexmore instantly. The apocalypse carried weapons that could crack the planet like an egg, turn its atmosphere into plasma, or simply erase it from existence. But they didn't want to destroy the world. They wanted to send a message. "You see," Mitchell continued, his voice now carrying a hint of the teacher explaining a lesson to a particularly slow student. "We've been studying warfare for our entire evolutionary history. While your species was learning to farm, we were perfecting the art of killing. While you were building your first cities, we were developing strategies that would make your generals weep." The apocalypse fired once. The beam that erupted from its main cannon was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It didn't destroy indiscriminately, was surgical, precise, almost artistic in its application. The energy cascaded across the planet's surface like liquid lightning, seeking out specific targets with impossible accuracy. Every military installation on Vexmore simply ceased to exist. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the world for a millennium were erased from reality. The government buildings where the orders for genocide had been given were reduced to atomic dust. The war monuments celebrating Vorthon conquests were vaporized. But the hospitals remained untouched. The schools continued to stand. The civilian neighborhoods where ordinary Vorthon families lived and loved and dreamed were completely unharmed. "Your military is gone," Mitchell announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the planet. "Your government is gone. Your ability to wage war is gone. But we're leaving you alive because we want you to remember this day. We want you to remember what happens when you attack humanity. The precision was inhuman. No, scratch that, tit was perfectly human. It demonstrated the kind of controlled fury that only a species capable of both infinite compassion and absolute ruthlessness could achieve. Supreme. Commander Velkov stared at the tactical displays showing his planet's complete military defeat. In the span of a single shot, his hands trembled as he realized that humanity had just demonstrated they could destroy his entire civilization while barely exerting themselves. "Why?" he whispered into his communicator, hoping the human would hear him. "Why spare us?" Mitchell's response chilled him to his core, because dead enemies can't spread the word. "We want every species in the galaxy to know what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. We want them to understand that humanity survived every extinction event in our planet's history for a reason." The apocalypse began to turn away from the planet, its mission complete. But Mitchell's final words echoed across the galaxy, carried by Vorthon communication networks to every corner of their former empire. "Tell them what you saw here. Tell them that humanity is no longer hiding. Tell them that we are coming for anyone who thinks genocide is acceptable." The age of human dominance had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Want to see how humanity transforms from hidden defenders to galactic peacekeepers? The final part of this story will show you exactly why preparation and patience always triumph over brute force. And if you want to understand how small, consistent efforts can compound into overwhelming advantage over time, check out my video about the power of compounding, because that's exactly what humanity has demonstrated on a galactic scale. 6 months after the Vorthon attack, the galaxy had changed forever. Not just politically or militarily, but fundamentally. The rules that had governed interstellar relations for millennia had been rewritten in a single day, by a species that everyone had dismissed as primitive cave dwellers. The once mighty Vorthon Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for over 3 centuries, was scattered to the cosmic winds. Their fleets were destroyed, their military infrastructure reduced to atomic dust, and their surviving worlds now flew human protection flags. The predators had become the protected, and everyone in the galaxy understood the implications. Admiral Susan Davis stood before the newly formed Galactic Council in a chamber that had been hastily constructed on the neutral world of Kepler-4 to be representatives from hundreds of worlds watched her with a mixture of fear, awe, and desperate hope. The humans had revealed themselves as the galaxy's apex predators, and everyone knew it. Davis was 54 years old, a career military officer who had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. She had lost her younger brother in the Denver strike, watched her hometown of Minneapolis become a crater, and then helped coordinate the most devastating military response in galactic history. Now she stood as humanity's voice to the cosmos. The Vorthuns thought they were dealing with a primitive species, Davis said calmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. They were wrong. We've been watching all of you for decades, learning your technologies, your tactics, your weaknesses. We chose to remain hidden because we hoped for peace. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Representatives from species that had ruled star systems for millennia sat in stunned quiet, processing the implications of what they had just heard. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthons, they had been secretly studying every major galactic power for decades. Davis gestured to the holographic display behind her, showing the 38 worlds the Vorthons had destroyed over the centuries. But now, instead of barren wastelands, the display showed thriving reconstruction efforts. Human engineering crews working alongside survivor populations. Human medical teams treating radiation sickness. Human agricultural specialists restoring poisoned soil. But when pushed, Davis continued, her voice hardening slightly. We respond. We respond with precision, with overwhelming force, and with the accumulated wisdom of a species that has been at war with itself for 10,000 years. That last part hit the chamber like a physical blow. Most galactic species had achieved peace within their own civilizations millennia ago. The idea of a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare against itself was absolutely terrifying. The council chamber was dead silent. Every representative understood the implications. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthons, they had done it so completely, so efficiently, that it was clear they could do the same to anyone else in the galaxy. Ambassador Krelvash of the Centauri Federation, whose people had been the galaxy's premier military power before the Vorthan rise, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His species had weapons that could shatter planets, fleets that numbered in the millions, and military traditions stretching back 50,000 years. But watching the human response to the Vorthan attack, he realized that none of it mattered. The humans had demonstrated technology that made his people's greatest weapons look like children's toys. However, Davis continued, her voice softening slightly, we prefer cooperation to conquest. We're establishing the human protection protocols. Any species that respects the sovereignty of others will find us valuable allies. Any species that chooses aggression, she smiled, and somehow that expression was more terrifying than any threat could have been. It was the smile of a predator that had just revealed its true nature and was feeling generous enough to offer mercy. Well, ask the Vorthans how that worked out for them. The implications rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. The humans weren't just offering protection, they were fundamentally restructuring galactic civilization. The age of might makes right was over. The age of human oversight had begun. But here's what made it truly revolutionary. Humanity wasn't demanding tribute or submission. They were offering partnership. The human protection protocols weren't about conquest. They were about preventing another Vorthon empire from ever rising again. Ambassador Yelanara of the Traitor Consortium, whose people had suffered under Vorthon taxation for centuries, was the first to speak. What do you require from us? Davis's response was simple. Behave like civilized beings. Trade freely. Resolve disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. Respect the sovereignty of other species. In return, you'll have access to human technology, human protection, and human partnership in exploring the galaxy. The offer was unprecedented. Humans were essentially proposing to become the galaxy's police force, using their overwhelming technological advantage to maintain peace rather than impose dominance. And if we refuse? Asked Ambassador Vexnal of the warrior clans. His people's entire culture built around conquest and strength. Davis's smile didn't waver. Then you'll discover what the Vorthons learned. We'd prefer cooperation, but we're very, very good at the alternative. As the council dispersed, whispers spread throughout the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The humans were no longer hiding. They were no longer pretending to be primitive. They were watching everything. The age of humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in galactic history, species had achieved apex predator status and chosen to use that power to protect rather than conquer. But the most terrifying part? Everyone understood that this was just the beginning. Humanity had revealed enough of their capabilities to end the Vorthan threat. But the technological demonstrations suggested they were holding back far more than they had shown. The galaxy had a new sheriff, and that sheriff had just politely informed everyone that the old rules were over. Play nice, or discover what happens when you wake up something that has been preparing for war since before your civilization existed. Asterisk, asterisk. The end asterisk asterisk want to understand how humanity's 60-year preparation strategy mirrors the power of consistent, long-term thinking in your own life? The same principles that allowed humans to secretly build overwhelming advantage, while appearing weak, can transform your personal and professional success. Check out my video about the power of compounding because small, consistent actions over time create results that seem impossible to those who only see the final outcome.